21st century. Good evening. I would like to call our Town of Sydney regular council meeting on Monday, December 4th to order at 6 p.m. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith, and colleagues in the council chamber this evening, to my far left, Councillor Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Renewal, and to my far right, Councillor Duncan, and Councillor Garnett. Good evening to staff here at the meeting and attending the meeting this evening, and good evening to members of the public who may be watching the live webcast or a recording of the meeting at a later time. I want to acknowledge with respect that we're holding our meeting this evening in the territory of the Wasanish Nations, and we express our gratitude for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia, and we acknowledge the ongoing importance of these lands to the Wasanish Nations and the importance of our truth and reconciliation efforts with them. I'll turn to approval of the agenda as presented with one amendment, and that is under section 16. I will read in a notice of motion this evening. I'd look for approval as amended.
Amended as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. We're now turning to public participation, our regular public participation period, where we provide an opportunity for members of the public to address council this evening. I do see two members of staff. Sir, do you wish to address council this evening? Thank you. So we will move forward to our next item on the agenda under 4D, and we do have this evening the recognition of long-term employees, and I'll call upon Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'm honored and privileged this evening to present the annual Staff Recognition Awards for long-term service with the Town of Sydney. It's an opportunity to celebrate the dedication, commitment, and unwavering service of our exceptional Town of Sydney employees. So indeed, these are individuals who have dedicated a significant portion of their lives to the betterment of our community in the service of local government. So in every organization, there are pillars of strength and commitment, and today we shine a spotlight on those employees who have completed 10, 15, 20, or even 25 years of service with the Town of Sydney. So these aren't just numbers. They represent years of hard work, sacrifice, and a steadfast commitment to the values that make our town thrive. So I was recently reminded, back in junior high school, I was taught about the myth of Sisyphus. And working in local government can at times feel a bit like a Sisyphean task. So just when you think the boulder is going to reach the top of the mountain, it kind of begins to roll back down. And you just hope it doesn't roll over you. So when we talk about long-term recognition awards, we aren't just acknowledging a specific point in time. We're not talking about a specific time frame. We're acknowledging a journey that has seen the growth and evolution of our community, but we've also seen the growth and evolution of these employees in the service that they provided to our organization. So in a world that often values speed and instant gratification, their steadfast commitment to the town is a shining example of the power of commitment and the belief that the work that we do in local government matters. Maybe pushing that boulder up the hill might just be worth it. So as I go through and present these long-term recognition awards, let us not just see them as tokens of appreciation, but as symbols of the lasting impact that each one of them has had on the organization and our strong and vibrant community that we call Sydney. So, Mr. Mayor, if you wouldn't mind joining me at the podium, and we'll look to congratulate this year's recipients. So the first recipient this evening is an employee that I know very well, and I hold in exceptionally high regard, as she does indeed epitomize the values of hard work and commitment and loyalty to the organization. I've had the privilege of working alongside her for almost her entire tenure and my entire tenure in the town of Sydney. She began her career in Sydney in 1998 as an administrative assistant in the administration department. Then in 2007, her role expanded significantly to that of deputy clerk. And finally, in 2015, she became the town of Sydney's first corporate officer. Please join me in congratulating Sandi Nelson for her exemplary 25 years of service with the town of Sydney.
Congratulations, and thank you so much.
I don't have a speech or anything.
Thank you, Sandy. You sure, Sandy? No, you're good? Okay. Very fortunate to have this next individual here this evening as well. Again, he's someone that I've grown to know very well in his tenure with the town. I know he's been in local government for many, many years prior to town of Sydney. He has had a career that has spanned time in the Lower Mainland, as well as our neighbor, the District of North Saanich, for many years as well. He's a stellar key member of our management team, and again, just a steady rock and an absolute privilege to work with. Please join me in recognizing Brian Robinson, who's the Manager of Public Works and Parks, for his 10 years of service with the town. Thank you.
Congratulations, Brian.
Thanks, Cliff.
Would you like a picture?
What's that?
Would you stand for a picture?
If you please, I will.
Could we actually take it there? It's just the screen's gonna.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Laura. Okay, so the next individual we'll recognize this evening started with the town, began his career in 2002 as a laborer. In 2006, he became the town's duty person in the Public Works Department, and in 2008 was promoted to charge hand of surface infrastructure. Please join me in recognizing John Macedo for his 20 years of service with the town. This next employee will recognize his name. He began his career in 2003 as a laborer. He moved over to the Parks Department in 2007 as a gardener, and in 2020 he was promoted to Gardener 2. Please join me in recognizing Wes Nelson for his 20 years of service with the town of Sydney. Next, we have someone that began his career in the Public Works Department as a laborer. In 2006, he became a duty person. In 2008, he was promoted to charge hand of surface infrastructure. And in 2023, he was promoted to crew chief of service infrastructure. Please join me in recognizing Alan Holt for his 20 years of service with the town of Sydney. This next employee began his time with Sydney in the Public Works Department in 2007 as a laborer. In 2009, he became a duty person in Public Works. In 2011, a charge hand of underground utilities. And 2019, a crew chief with underground utilities. Please join me in recognizing Corey Coward for his 15 years of service with the town of Sydney. Before I move on, I hope you can recognize a theme that you see these people that progress through our organization, and it's wonderful that we're able to do this and be able to retain these employees for such long periods of time and again, advance them through the organization. This next individual began his career in 2008 in the Public Works Department as an electrician. Please join me in recognizing Ron Green for 15 years of dedicated service with the town of Sydney. This next person began her career in 2018 as a backhoe operator, and please join me in recognizing Brenda Richardson for 15 years of service with the town of Sydney. This next person began his career in the Public Works Department in 1997 as a laborer. However, in 2014, he joined the Fire Department as a regular full-time firefighter. Please join me in recognizing Craig Pelton for his 10 years of service with the town. And finally, last but not certainly least, this person began her career in 2013 with the Fire Department as an administrative assistant, and in 2020 she became the Fire and Emergency Management Office Services Coordinator, and the longest title in the municipality. Please join me in recognizing Donna Barnes for her 10 years of dedicated service with the town. So thank you, Mayor and Council. That concludes the 2023 Service Recognition Awards for staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Humble. Turning to the next item on our agenda is adoption of minutes under 7A, and we have the minutes from our regular council meeting of November 27th. If I could have a mover and seconder, please.
So moved.
Moved by Councilor Duck. And seconded. Any errors or corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. We're next turning to Section 9, Rise and Report from in-camera minutes. This is for information only. These are from the Council in-camera meeting of November 14th, where Council made new appointments based on terms that expired or retirements. And I will read all of the names out, partly to acknowledge those who are serving the community. Andrew Tidman is continuing his 2-year appointment until December 2024. Bernadine Vandermeer is continuing her 2-year appointment until December 2024. Clarence Bolt is continuing his 2-year appointment until December 2024. Lucina Berluk is continuing her 2-year appointment until December 2024. And we're pleased that Eric Diller has been appointed to a 2-year term to expire in December 2025. David Milburn has been appointed to a 2-year appointment to December 2025, and Alex Gorlick has been appointed for 2 years until December 2025. The Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee, the citizen members to be appointed will be announced at a future date. Our Board of Variance has 3 members from the community at large, and those appointments are for 3-year terms, and citizen members, all 3 appointments continue to 2024, and those are Tony Lomas, Patty Smith, and Hillary Denning. The Peninsula Recreation Commission, we have 1 resident serving a 2-year term, and Karen Frost will complete her 2-year appointment in December 2024. For the Saanich Peninsula Water and the Saanich Peninsula Wastewater Commissions, those appointments are to be announced at a later date. And from for the Victoria Airport Authority Board of Directors, our council provides nominees to the Airport Authority, and the airport appoints those Sydney residents, and Sammy Turkey as appointment will continue until December 31st, 2025, and Kelly Bull-Tomer as new appointment will expire December 31st, 2026. On the Victoria Airport Authority Noise Management Committee, Teresa Salomon has a 1-year appointment to December 2024, and Isabel Bliss has a 1-year appointment to December 2024. And lastly, our official town crier will continue in his 4-year appointment, and we thank Kenny Pardmore for serving in that role. And on behalf of Mayor and Council, I want to extend our appreciation to all the residents who are serving as citizen appointments to these bodies, which are important to the functioning of the town of Sydney and our community. We appreciate, so for those who are continuing to serve in their appointments and for those who are newly appointed, we thank you for your interest, your time, and your commitment. With that, I'll move on to number 10, which is the Mayor's Report, and I have two items this evening. The first, under 10A, is the 2024 Council appointments. And Council, you'll certainly be aware of this. But I want to make a comment to the public at large that in addition to the 7 members of Council serving and attending Council meetings on a regular basis, and our Committee of the Whole meetings, and I want to extend appreciation to all of my colleagues for the preparation and time and commitment that you put in to preparing well for meetings and engaging with the public. But in addition to those Council and Committee of the Whole meetings, all members of Council are serving on 34 different appointments to external boards, commissions, and committees. And I won't be reading out the appointments this year. At the start of our term at this time last year, all council members were appointed. Some of those appointments, of those 34 appointments, do continue for 2 years or for 4 years. But this evening, we, as part of our agenda package, we do have the complete list of 34 appointments. And after corresponding with members, my colleagues on council, the appointments will remain unchanged for 2024. I think it provides additional opportunities for council colleagues and myself to gain experience in those areas that we're serving now, and I think it adds a measure of continuity for the external bodies that we're each serving on. So we do have those included in the agenda this evening, and I would look for a motion, please.
So moved as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, so that motion, and I just disappeared my agenda, was that the 2024 council appointments be approved. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you. And under 10B, we have the 2024 acting mayor's appointments. As per our council procedures bylaw, the 6 members of council each take 2 months of the year to serve in the role of acting mayor when I'm unavailable. And I would look for a motion to move the recommendation, please. Councillor Dutt?
So moved that the 2024 acting mayor's appointments be approved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And the motion carries. Thank you. So we're now moving to committee reports under section 12, and the first is 12A, the Sandwich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee, and we are receiving their minutes, the minutes from their November 23rd meeting. We don't need a motion to receive those minutes. They're received by virtue of being on the agenda. I will turn to our council representative, Councillor O'Keefe, if you have any comments at this time.
No, not at this time.
Thank you, Councillor. So we do see under 12A, recommendation 1, the recommendation from the committee. But in addition to that on the agenda, we do have an additional staff report with recommendations. And I would now turn to staff asking if we could please have an introduction to that report. Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Good evening. So the park's concept plan for Breather Park envisioned a neighborhood park with a small all-ages playground in the park. Staff worked off this concept when developing plans and budgets for the park and also developing the RFP for the playground equipment, which was issued earlier this year. We did receive 12 different playground design concepts from 6 different companies for playground for Breather Park. These went to the Sandwich Peninsula Accessibility Committee in November, and the committee provided a range of feedback and ultimately carried the motion shown in the minutes. The resolution could have significant resource implications both for cost and staff resources, depending on what may be adopted by council. It could potentially delay future planned parks projects. We do have a very ambitious parks master plan. So we do have a number of future park projects planned for the coming, 20 years. So every change we make does have a domino effect on future implementation. I do want to note there's a typo in the staff report on page 4. It says 72,834 for the difference for the rubberized surfacing for this option. The actual correct value is $75,362. So just note that that slight change in the cost of the rubberized surfacing if we were to provide surfacing for the entire option 2, which was reviewed by staff. So staff did go through an evaluation process for all the submitted playground equipment based on the RFP and community feedback. We did select Habitat Systems option 2, which is included in the package for information. It is different and unique compared to other playgrounds in the area, so why that was selected. Well, there's a range of other reasons, but that is something that is beneficial about it. And so staff's ultimate recommendation to keep within the existing budget and still try to align with the committee, Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee's recommendation is to negotiate directly with the preferred playground supplier and provide the rubberized surface for the whole area, but perhaps scale down the size of the actual playground. So I'm here if you have any questions on any of that.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. So often when we have a staff report, we do go to questions of staff afterwards, but we do have 2 recommendations here. And what I would like to do is I would like to turn to Councillor O'Keefe to move a recommendation, and council members can certainly ask any questions with regards to Breathitt Park while that motion is on the floor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Okay, thank you. So I will move the recommendation that supports what came from SPAC, which is that in regard to the Breathitt Park Playground, that staff bring forward for council's consideration a revised plan that includes additional accessibility structures and other design features such as a play structure to accommodate a wheelchair, a rubberized surface for play area, improved access to all areas, including the playground, picnic area, and multi-sport court, a covered picnic shelter, an open, accessible play space, and a more central location for washroom facilities.
Okay, moved by Councillor O'Keefe. Do we have a seconder?
Second for discussion.
We have Councillor Duck as seconder. I'll turn to the mover and seconder. Councillor O'Keefe.
Sure. So just first a bit of some of the general comments that came from SPAC in regards to the design. Unfortunately, SPAC wasn't consulted prior to the RFP going out, and so some of the play structures that ranked highly maybe would be suitable for people in the general population, but not for kids necessarily with disabilities. Some of the things they noted is that there were no elements that a child in a mobility device could interact or play on their own. That some of the elements categorized as accessible required the child to be lifted out of their mobility device. The design focused on play equipment rather than creating an accessible and inclusive play area. And the proposed engineered wood chip surface is not an accessible play surface. I'm in favor of sort of revisiting this playground design for a few reasons. I think everybody here would agree that having accessible playgrounds is important for children, especially those with disabilities who are more at risk for isolation and bullying. So the suggestion that we would just identify some parks as accessible or put in one sort of accessible feature in the park, I don't think is a good option to pursue. We just adopted our accessibility plan. Some of the things that we heard in the engagement with our accessibility plan was one of the key barriers to accessibility was our outdoor spaces, including public parks and playgrounds. There were a limited number of accessible playgrounds on the Saanich Peninsula, and respondents would like future playground projects to have accessibility considered from the planning stages. I understand that, staff's concern, and I think we all share the concern about additional costs and timelines. Council approved the Parks Master Plan and staff have proceeded based on our previous direction. However, that was before we started to become more enlightened in regards to accessibility issues. And we're now starting to realize that persons with disabilities, their needs have not always been adequately addressed. And so we're gonna have some catching up to do. And that is gonna cost money, and it might mean having to revisit other plans and budgets, but I think it's worth that investment. What we're seeing in other provinces in Canada is playgrounds are mandated in some provinces to be accessible. So it's not just a matter of having one or two accessible playgrounds in a municipality, that the focus is on providing equal and accessible access to all kids. We were in a similar position when we were looking at our downtown washroom, and we were moving ahead with the plan there, and people in the community, accessibility community, alerted us to changing places. And so we thought that was a good idea. We took a step back, and yeah, it required some extra money and it added time, but this spring we're going to be one of the few municipalities in Victoria area that will have one of those. The town of Sydney was recognized as we were featured in Local Government Management Association because we're on the leading edge in regards to our Tri-Municipal Accessible Advisory Committee. So I think there's an opportunity for us here to kind of take a second look at this and design something that's on the leading edge for providing accessible and inclusive playgrounds for kids. And I'll just leave it at that, if there's any other comments.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Duck.
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, I'll turn to colleagues, and again, we can either ask questions or deliberate. Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess I have a problem with some of the recommendations, and from my perspective, when I voted for the motion to send it for the total overall overview, what I was hoping to hear would be sort of a high-level general conversation about the whole design feature for the park. But what I was hoping in terms of the recommendation was just specific to the playground, because I think that was kind of where we were headed at that time. And from my perspective, as somebody who lived in that exact neighborhood for 22 and a half years, an extremely underserved area of Sydney, I would have loved to have had a playground like that for my kids 25 years ago. And there are a lot of kids in that area still to this day that I can attest to from my previous work career. And so I'm not, although I see the valid points you're making, I'm not in favor of having this delayed for a redesign, simply because it's something this part of the community needs. And I want to be able to try and find some kind of compromise where we can have a park that works for everybody, but not to the point where we're going to delay something. And I'm not worried about overall about the cost, because I believe the rubberized portion should be there. I also think a shade element, which you didn't mention, is important there because there are no trees. And given what we've had in summers lately, I think it's important to have some area where it's a little cooler for kids when they're playing. And I do think having the wheelchair accessible play element, I think, is something I could get behind adding to it. But in terms of the overall plan, I really would like to see this go forward, because I think the people in that neighborhood are deserving of this. And I think any delay is just not fair to the neighborhood. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gannett. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I think Councillor O'Keefe has made good points. The one feature that I think would not be in favor of having really moved forward further was the covered picnic shelter. I think for the reason the staff brought up, just with the problems with that people end up camping in them, and that they're somewhat, I find, for the cost, they don't provide a lot of value. I know the one at Tulista is used a lot for birthday parties and putting the food under, but if we have a shade, a cloth shade structure, right, it serves the same purpose. And I mean, most of the birthday parties I go to, if there's no picnic structure, somebody just rents one of those canopies for a day. And if that's the kind of thing we want to enable, I think there's better solutions that are more cost effective and, create less problems. So I think having no permanent covered picnic shelter would be my preference there. And hopefully that would save some money we could use towards the rubberized play surface and better accesses. I think it's unfortunate that it didn't end up in the package from SPAC because, one member of the committee sent out, examples of the playgrounds that they liked, the accessible playgrounds that were theme-based and included a lot of kind of naturalized shapes of playgrounds that were different and they found were more accessible simply by dint of them not being defined, engineered structures. And to me, I really enjoyed that was something that they found accessible and that style of playground was something that was accessible, because I'm really attracted to the natural playground type, which is usually created is portrayed as being completely at odds with accessibility because it's got logs and boulders and things which are usually not looking very wheelchair friendly. But this looked like it meets that idea of the naturalized design, which I think is a really good fit for this neighborhood and this park because it's surrounded by what remains of of trails and that forest. And I thought, wow, this is actually a really good opportunity to have this park be integrated with a play structure that's also accessible. I know that the cost of the examples he had was very, very high. But I'm wondering if some middle ground with that rubberized surface and maybe foregoing, if Habitat can do it, I have no idea what kind of other types of things they do in their catalog, but that kind of a thing that might be much smaller in scale, but provides more of those naturalized surfaces. So you're not looking at the expense of a swing, but you are, the children who require wheelchairs are still able to access everything that the other kids are, and the other kids are still able to climb and use their bodies, and it's still a very unique park that they're getting, and I'd love to see that. I don't know, since it's very different in style, how much there would be a delay, but I think if we can get that, I think that would be worth the delay. I feel with the improvements that have already been made to the Rest Haven Park and what had, not Rest Haven, Rathdown, and the additional parks on the west side, and that Green Glade was updating their park, and Panorama has upgraded their parks, that we've kind of got some of that pressure to get everything done right away. It's not walking distance for the people in this area, but North Saanich did create their park they had on their airport. It's not quite walking distance either, but again, it's closer. And I feel like getting this right now that we've been given kind of the instructions to make it inclusive and experiment with something new that would from the get-go for as we go on might put us in better stead. I would be okay with delaying the timelines as long as we know we take that pressure off the staff myself. But thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Duck, you had your hand, and then I'll put myself next.
Yes, if I can, questions through to staff. Looking at this motion, I'm just wondering if they were implemented, what's the time impact, delay time, if you were looking at portions or all of these?
Ms. Clardy.
Through to Councillor Duck, it really ranges. It depends what we're going to go for. We'll likely need to retender it. If we do need to get like a specialist to design this for us, there's that. There's all the other priorities that we have ongoing as well. Budget is, we're in the middle of that on the staff side. So it's hard to say at this time what it will actually be, but we won't be able to pull this together immediately, let's say that.
Okay, given that, what's the current timeline based on the recommendation from staff?
Through to Councillor Duck, we believe we'd be able to stick on our existing timeline, which is the end date for installation, I believe is the end of April 2024 for installation of the playground structure.
Thank you, and if I may, one more question. Again, through the staff, given these recommendations and the motion here, are we now looking at all our parks plans for changes to adapt and make them more accessible as we move forward?
Through to Councillor Duck, that was something else that Council referred to SPAC, was the Parks Master Plan and the Parks Concept Plan. So as we work through that with the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Committee, yes, I would think that will be brought in. It will, I guess staff's ambitious schedule will definitely have to be slowed down, and additional funding will be required to make it all happen, but that's something we can bring forward through future budget deliberations.
Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I absolutely in no way want to question at all Ms. Clary, and I agree there would be a delay. I think she's being generous with respect to time frame, and I honestly think that that retendering and going through this and without delaying what we have on the go, I would say that we're talking about a 6 to 8 month delay in this project advancing from where it could be if we proceed on the basis of the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Councillor Duck, you do have the floor.
Yeah, so based on Mr. Humble's assessment, that means we're looking at the end of 2024 versus April of 2024. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I do have a couple of questions, and then I have Councillor Renewal. My first question is with regards to the current budget. So the current budget is noted, or sorry, it says the playground budget, but there was a design, is the total budget for this Breather Park $130,000, and that included all of the work that staff has done to date and the design work that has come back from the consultant, and it would include the installation.
Through to Ms. Mayor, the $130,000 is just for the playground supply and installation. There's a $200,000 budget total for the park, so the extra $70,000 is for improving the parking area. It will be gravel for now. We plan to pave it during the second phase of the project, which it is currently scheduled for 2025 or 26. This phase would also include pathways to the playground. Right now, there's it's a clean slate, so we really need to have pathways so people can actually access the playground. We had intended to do some benches and some picnic tables. We may hold off on that depending on council's desire for picnic shelter, because that may impact the design of where those elements may be. So yeah, that's what was covered, and also removing the existing baseball diamonds, dugouts, and fencing. So that's what makes up that additional $70,000. There's also some drainage work as well, which is required for the playground improvements.
So the $200,000 budget is for this is for the playground equipment to be installed, and then for additional changes as you've described to occur in 2024 or 2025.
The original budget was 2023. It was, could have been done this year, but because of resources, we got the tender out, and now we are ready to award the construction. Public Works have started removing some of the existing materials, so we are starting the project now, but it will carry over into 2024.
Thank you. So the budget was approved, the $200,000 has been approved within the 2023 budget. So I appreciate that this recommendation, the wording of this recommendation is consider additional accessibility structures and design and bring forward a revised plan, or bring a revised plan forward. Well, a revised plan, given the 6 or 7 improvements that are recommended in this motion, there would be significant budget implications. And so understanding the timeline that Ms. Clary and Mr. Humble have provided, I don't see as my question through to staff is the rebudgeting of this project is unlikely to come forward for budget 2024. Or is that something that staff would consider? There would be additional budget beyond the $200,000 in 2023 if one or more of these improvements in the recommendation that is on the floor are made. My question is how that will be addressed through budgeting in the timeframe. Mr. Hisek.
Whatever additions are approved tonight through council deliberations, we'd be looking for pre-approval, if you will, for those elements, and we'll simply capture it in the next financial plan as something that's already gone through council.
Ms. Clary? Thank you, Mr. Hisek.
Further to that, if council were looking for staff to do a full redesign of the play area, we would be looking to hire a consultant to help us with that. And I would suggest, as stated in the staff report, that that would be a 2024 design project, and that would come forward during the 2025 budget. So then that would be built in 2025, because we will have to work on those designs. So if that is, it depends what direction council gives tonight, but if the direction is to go back and redesign the whole space, I would suggest 2024 would be the design year for that. That will give us enough time to do all the required engagement and bring it to council for approval, and 2025 would be the build year.
And we would approve it in the 2025 budget.
Yes.
Thank you. My next question is, we understand the Parks Master Plan has identified priority parks and that there will be improvements to parks over time, over many years. Is there additional improvements planned for Breather Park beyond the improvements that are budgeted for in 2020, this year and next year?
Yes, there is a sport court also planned in the next 2 years. Within the next 2 years, it's in the budget. Additional pathway work, some additional drainage work, and paving the parking lot, installing services for a future washroom. A washroom would be in the plan for installation in the long term, like a 10 to 20 year, but if we don't install the services now, we will be paving ourselves in. So that would be the next phase, would be to get to build the sport court, finish up the any connections required for a washroom, finishing up the trails, the design trails, and paving the parking area.
Okay, so multi-year improvements to this park and others, as we understand it. So the opportunity, given one of the points that Councillor Keefe made reference to, was that we did approve the Parks Master Plan a few years ago. We've now approved the accessibility plan, and we will be able to use that accessibility lens or information, if you will, as we plan future park improvements. And so, given that there will be future budget for future improvements in Breather Park and other parks, staff would be giving consideration to accessibility components or accessibility features in those future improvements.
Again, it depends the direction that council gives. If there's direction to install a specialized piece of equipment for that children in wheelchairs can use without transferring, then that would be something that could be brought forward during the future budget. That wouldn't be the intent right now. The intent, based on the current plan, would be that the playground would be built in 2024, and then the sport court would be the big thing in 2025, and then or 2026, and finishing up all the pathways. But if council were to direct us to bring back additional budget for that next phase for a specific wheelchair accessible playground feature, that is something we can do.
Okay, sorry, I perhaps didn't frame my question as well as I could. So there are current plans, but then there will be new improvements contemplated by staff that will be budgeted for in future years. Staff now have the option, with the experience of the Accessibility Committee and our accessibility plan, actually bring forward accessibility design elements that might not have otherwise occurred, given the information we have today. And yes, there would be budget associated with those. I guess where I'm coming from is, one of the options is, if we were to approve the staff recommendation this evening, that does not rule out the opportunity for accessibility improvements to Breather Park and other parks moving forward. My next question is with regards to a distinction in types of parks. I use the term signature park, and so a park like Tallista that has, or Iroquois Park, that have many different features. We know that not only members of our community but members of other communities visit Sydney, and when they're in Sydney they use those parks. Could staff perhaps describe how we might describe differences between our parks, if there's different terminology, and that has an implication in the facilities that are, the level of facilities that are provided in, I don't know whether it's neighborhood parks or signature parks or.
Typically, we would refer to like a Talista or an Iroquois Park as a destination park. There's just more parking there. It's more walkable for more people. It's more likely that people from outside the community, like you say, will travel to go to those parks. Breather Park, again, in the parks concept plan, is referred to as a neighborhood park, which you would expect people mostly to be walking to. There will be parking spaces based on the design concepts. There will be 11 parking spaces, and following our off-street parking loading bylaw, one of them will be accessible. But yes, Breather Park is referred to as a neighborhood park in our parks concept plan.
Okay. So while over time, several of our parks may in fact have accessible design elements or accessible features, if we were setting priorities going forward in the master plan, would we want to put our first or the next accessibility elements into our destination parks versus a community park? Given that it's a more used, higher used park.
Again, that would be up to mayor and council to provide direction on that, but that would be staff's idea, because there's just more parking available. There's more other services. Even if we were to install something now in Breather Park, we don't intend to bring forward a washroom for another at least 10 years, right? So that park will, unless a washroom is accelerated at the request of council, that will limit the use of that park for a number of years.
Okay. My last question is with regards to, and I think of the peninsula, not just Sydney, because we have a facility like the Panorama Recreation Centre, which had a multi-sport court that, with all of the improvements and donations that were made, was probably close to $2 million. It's something like 15 or 16,000 square feet. And I believe there's many accessible elements to that. Would it be practical or prudent at some time in the future for, I don't know, perhaps the rec commission or the municipalities to determine, the availability and priorities for accessible elements in our parks, on a sub-regional basis? I mean, we see what North Saanich has done into what would be their destination park. I don't know that, they will be able to do that in another park or how many parks, but it seems to me that when, just last week, members of council sitting on the rec commission attended the $340,000 improvement to the playground equipment at Green Glade, which does have accessible elements. I think at some point it needs to be weighed, within our parks and maybe even our neighboring parks in our neighboring communities in terms of what the features are and accessible features. So my question was in terms of a needs assessment, if you will, on either within Sydney or on a peninsula-wide basis. I'm turning to Ms. Clary, but I also see Mr. Hissick willing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There have been early discussions about expanding sub-regional park service, and this is exactly the kind of thing that could be explored through that as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for taking all my questions. While I appreciate the work that the Accessibility Committee has done and the recommendations that they're making forward, I think we do have a limited budget now, and we have a timeline. We see that will be disrupted in a significant way if we move to do basically a redesign of this entire park. There will be significant costs associated with it, but there'll be significant timelines associated with it. And I think given the staff recommendation and given some of the answers to questions that we've heard this evening, that there will be opportunities in this park and other parks for us to bring important accessible elements to the parks. I'll leave my comments there, and I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole, and then if there's no other first-time speakers, to go to Councillor Duncan as a second-time speaker.
Thank you, Mayor. And if I may just comment, and I'll yield to Councillor Garnett if he would like to elaborate further, but at the recent Recreation Commission meeting, the Recreation Commission did vote to amend the budget that's being submitted to the CRD, so it was not yet approved, but to amend that budget to include a study of the nature in which you had queried staff, and so perhaps that element or that particular scope that you spoke to could be addressed. I know the manager of of Panorama is a member of the committee, and perhaps either through the committee or through the Rec Commission that could be encouraged. So that's just a comment that I believe a study of that nature peninsula-wide or sub-regionally will take place and could very well be included as you've suggested. I concur with the mayor's remarks that the timeline would be affected greatly if this were to be returned to staff in order to sort of revise the plan, and I think that would be unfortunate for the immediate community, as this is dubbed a neighborhood park. I'm generally supportive of the recommendation that's here, had it been sort of framed as, give future consideration to, this list and look to what could be implemented over budget cycles. I'm supportive of that. As the particular recommendation reads, I'm reluctant to support it, just given that implication in terms of moving forward with this neighborhood park, which has long been planned and budgeted for. I also note that one of these recommendations is indeed included in the staff recommendation, and that's around a rubberized surface for play area. So some of this is being incorporated. Staff have told us some of this can be in the future, and maybe some of these items, such as the picnic shelter or shaded area for picnic tables, is discouraged for reasons outlined in the staff report. So I'm supportive of what's suggested here. I'd rather see us move forward with the staff recommendation as has been presented. If I'm voting against supporting this specific recommendation that's before us from the Accessibility Advisory Committee, it's simply so that they can be included for future consideration. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. Just before going to Councillor Duncan, a question of process. So, Council, one possibility, depending on the level of support for the motion that's on the floor, is there could be an amendment. I'm not proposing the amendment, but that the Town of Sydney Council consider additional accessibility structures and design for future Sydney Park improvements. And so that would be noting the recommendations that have come forward from the Accessibility Committee. They have given due consideration to making these particular recommendations on accessibility features, and then it would be for staff to have that and consider that in the annual budgeting and improvements that they bring forward for any of our parks. Maybe one of these improvements will come in another park in another year, and it may be staff recommend that because it's a destination park or another park. So if we did do that, that would speak to accessibility in the future in our parks, but it wouldn't speak to going forward on Breathitt Park, and we could still pass the staff recommendation, which would move Breathitt Park forward on the timeline as currently proposed, but with the addition of additional accessibility component has been noted by colleagues. I'll leave my
I'm happy to move that amendment if it's timely.
Okay. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan, who was going to have the floor.
Yeah, and I think I had questions following from your previous questions to staff that probably help inform what our discussion would be on having these moved forward in other parks. So I don't know whether my asking them first or after that would be moved is better, but.
Okay. I'll turn the floor back to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you.
Back to Councillor.
Thank you. I'll move the amendment as suggested, and I captured that as the first part of the motion remains that the Town of Sydney consider additional accessibility structures and design for future park improvements.
Do we have a seconder for the amendment?
Point of order?
Yes?
I'm going to suggest that this should be a motion arising that we deal with this motion, because I think we're crossing paths here, and I think that we're gonna confuse the outcome. So I would suggest we deal with this motion, and if we want to look at future suggestions for staff, that'd be a motion arising rather than trying to adapt the specific one, because it is specific to Berthor Park.
So, thank you. I'll acknowledge your point of order, or the point you've made in your point of order, but I think this amendment is clear, and if it is not supported by council, then the motion as originally put forward would remain on the floor. I am going to turn to Ms. Nelson.
So just to be clear, the motion that was moved by Councillor O'Keefe did not reflect SPAC's exact recommendation. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your motion went to that staff bring forward a revised plan to include additional accessibility structures and design, including items such as those 6 identified. So to me, it seems like it's just for Breather Park. Am I correct in that? Yeah. Okay.
But
sorry, and to just respond, yeah, it's worded slightly different, only because when a recommendation comes forward, then it just rewording it as more of a direction, right? So, yeah, but you're right, it was specifically for Breather Park, and as was previously mentioned, council has already referred the Parks Master Plan to SPAC for their feedback
okay,
for
Councillor,
future.
yeah,
Okay.
we appreciate your clarification
Okay.
on the motion. So the motion that is on the floor, not the amendment, the motion that is on the floor does not make reference to Breather Park. The intention is Breather Park, but I don't, sorry, I'm turning to Ms. Nelson, who has a record of the motion read onto the floor.
So,
So could you please read
Yeah.
the motion? Yeah.
that staff bring forward a revised
I'm
plan.
going to turn for a moment. The amendment is still on the floor, but I'm going to turn for a moment.
No, it's not.
Sorry?
It wasn't seconded.
Okay. So, just before you withdraw it, if I could make a comment. So, it's not motivating one way or the other. What I'm suggesting is that if we defeat this motion, we're going to be coming back to saying the same thing for other parks as a motion arising. That's if I understood Councillor Duck correctly, he said that if we did not move forward with this amendment, we would have the opportunity to bring forward an amendment or a motion such as this as a motion arising, and Councillor Duck suggested that might be more appropriate. So what I'm saying is that we can either amend the motion to what the intent or the will of council is, or we're going to defeat this and we're going to basically restate it without the words Breather Park and without staff bringing it back. It's for future consideration. So that's why I've left the motion on the floor to make that comment. I will ask for a seconder. If there's no seconder, it does not move forward and we have the main motion on the floor. Do we have a seconder for the amendment? Seeing none, we don't have that amendment. We're with the main motion on the floor. Councillor Duncan, you did have the floor next with regards to the motion on the floor.
Yeah, thank you. These are just questions through to staff. So the mayor had asked, this is classified as a neighborhood park and not a destination park. And so I don't know if is this a category that the town of Sydney comes up with just because of the location or the facilities that are currently in a park, or is it based on another metric? Because I know when we upgraded Rathdown Park to have all the new stuff, it became a destination park, even though there's no parking. And this one has more parking than I think anything except Talista does, and it's gonna have a sport court. I think it's gonna be a destination park, whether we categorized it as that or not. And so I'm just wondering how we determine that, and therefore which other park that's in our queue would be considered a destination park that would be looking at these things in instead.
I'll turn to Ms. Clary, and then Mr. Hissick is ready to make a comment as well.
Through to Councillor Duncan, it was really out of the parks concept planning. I wasn't around at that time. I'm not sure if Mr. Hissick could provide more information, but yeah, the parks concept plans do refer to Breather Park as a neighborhood park. They refer to Rest Haven as a neighborhood park. They may even refer to Rathdown as a neighborhood park, so I'll just double check that. So Rathdown is referred to as a significant neighborhood park, so a little more, the intention was to be a little more, large.
Mr. Hisik?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So looking forward to the amendments that might be required to the Parks Master Plan resulting from these discussions. One thing I might suggest is to strategically designate only certain parks for fully accessible elements, not necessarily focus on destination versus neighborhood, but just take a good look and maybe geographically separate them so that there's a bit of coverage across the municipality as opposed to just focusing on the designation destination park.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. And where I was going in my previous questions and comments was that with the fact that we will have future improvements in parks, and there's the opportunity for those to be accessible elements, is that through the budgeting process, and the staff would be bringing forward those recommendations, just as they're bringing forward the current design for Breathitt Park. So I don't think, council, we should be designing a park. This particular park or other parks with particular features. I think we have heard from the Accessibility Committee with regards to their recommendation on accessible elements, and I think those can be incorporated as staff and council consider in future. Councillor Duncan, you still have the floor.
No, thank you. I think that answers that question, and I know Rest Haven Park is probably going to be one of the next ones that currently has a structure and a sport court that would come up, so perhaps that would be our next one. I don't know what else other parks of size would have that opportunity, and this is why I'm just concerned this might be our last opportunity on this side of the highway, but that might be too late.
Okay, so we're speaking to the motion on the floor. Councillor O'Keefe, or Councillor Novick for first time, and Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, generally, I'm very supportive of making as much of a park or any public service point accessible. I'm afraid I'll have to vote against this recommendation because I think it's a little too vague at this point, and I'm happy with the staff recommendation because the staff report does suggest that there will be accessible features to this park, and I'm also mindful of the budget, and if we do go ahead with this with the rubberized surface, which I'm fully supportive of, having seen this in numerous parks, and I think they're marvelous, but that's already going to bring the budget up to $200,000 or so. And as Ms. Clary said, with future renovations and adjustments to park equipment and stuff, there will be more accessible features being brought forward. So I'm not concerned that we're not going to be meeting the requirements of an accessible park. It might not be 100% as per SPAC's recommendation, but it's going to be pretty close over a period of time. And I think the important part is to get it done, get the job done, get it in place so that the youngsters and oldsters will be able to make use of it in the coming season rather than sending it back to committee and possibly not seeing anything there for another 2 years. So I think we need to move forward on this. So I'm all in favor of going with the original staff report, and I will vote against this particular motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So just to swing back to some of the comments made, it concerns me that comments such as, people in that area have been waiting for a park for a long time, and that's true. But currently, there's no fully accessible park anywhere in Sydney. So those kids have been waiting for a long time. When we did the consultation for our accessibility plan, 70% of the people felt that their needs were not listened to either often or all of the time. So we know that their needs aren't being addressed. So to say that, yeah, we're interested in accessibility, but sorry, these able-bodied people here in the Green Glade area have been waiting for a long time, and so we're gonna move forward with that. So-
Councillor O'Keefe, I am going to interject, and I think other councillor colleagues have spoken, and I think your interpretation of what they may say your interpretation may or may not be what they intended.
Okay,
And so I
Fair
think it's
enough.
better to speak to, deliberate on your point of view with regards to the motion on the floor.
fair enough. So in regards to just getting back to classification of the parks, and there seems to be an idea that accessibility should only be done in certain types of parks. And because this is a neighborhood park, it wouldn't warrant sort of full accessibility features. And I guess the comment that I would just make is that the trend in the world and in Canada is moving towards making all places accessible, play spaces accessible. So I think I think it's good to get on board with that and to start thinking about that and budgeting for that. In regards to other elements that may be incorporated, one of the issues that I have with the staff recommendation is that we heard from the accessibility committee about the play structures and the problems with those, so I won't reiterate that. So what's being proposed in the staff report is we're gonna have a rubberized surface. So kids in wheelchairs can wheel in there, but there's gonna be no play structures that they can independently interact with. And there's no plans to do that in the future. So that's a concern for me. Also, as Councillor Duncan mentioned, I'm also concerned that this is our last opportunity really to do something significant from the ground up for an accessible playground. So when you look at the trend with accessible playgrounds, you want to start the design from the beginning and not try and retrofit after the fact, because it ends up being more expensive. When we went through the consultation for Rathdown Park, and at the time, we talked about accessibility then, and we thought it was going to be accessible, but it's really not. And so at that time, we were under the impression that engineered wood chips was a good surface, and we found out that wasn't the case. So we've been talking about accessibility in play spaces for a couple of years, and so it concerns me that going into Breathitt Park, we're still not completely there yet, and I'm not confident. I don't see anything in the plan here that suggests that we're going to do anything significantly different at Breathitt Park, except we're going to add a rubberized play surface. And as I say, a kid in a wheelchair, they can wheel in there, but there's not going to be anything for them to do independently. So where I continue to land is that I recognize the challenge for staff and for council in terms of timelines and budgeting, and that there's people elsewhere waiting for parks. But this is a segment of our population that has been kind of felt and neglected for a long time. And I think we need to put in the extra effort and the time to do this right. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Just before going to Councillor Gurnett, I do have a question of clarification. And is that, it's not in the wording, but was it the intent of the committee, SPAC committee, that Breathitt Park would become 100% accessible?
You're asking me that,
As a representative to the committee, yeah.
I would say yes, because some of the comments that they talked about in terms of wanting to have improved access to all the areas. So the playground, the picnic area, the multi-sport court. So the current design didn't, the current design has certain pockets. So this is where the playground is, this is where the multi-court is, where certain features are. And so they were looking for a design that made it easier to transition from one area to the other. The other thing they talked about was that it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive equipment. So there's other ways of designing play spaces, and I think some of you seen videos and things of that nature, so that it doesn't need to have necessarily a $75,000 play structure. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, my reading of the minutes and my reading of the recommendation is the intent of the committee appears to be 100% accessible park, although I haven't seen that wording in place. I would also ask, well, this is a neighborhood park, would it be the intention, and I'm not suggesting you can answer this, Councillor Keefe, as a representative to the committee, but might it be the intention of the committee that they would want all future improvements in all of our parks to be 100% accessible? A comment has been made that other provinces or other jurisdictions are moving to all accessible. I just need to understand that a little bit better.
So what I'll say is what my impression is from what I've heard from the committee and what the research I've done on accessible playgrounds. And what I would say, my observation and my research leads me to believe that play spaces for kids should always be accessible for all of them. And so that we need to be moving more towards creating the play space that is accessible for everybody. So in answer to your question, yes. And there's, some Ontario is, and it's a struggle for municipalities when you have to do that. And it means, okay, we might have to scale back on certain elements of the park or on other sorts of things that we want to do.
Okay.
But that's...
I thank you for the clarification, and I'll turn to Councillor Gurnett because you're next on the speaking list. I just had that question, and then I will have a comment to make.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I brought up my original comment, and staff has actually spoken to it, that, again, we're speaking to aspects of the park which are in different phases years out, which we can accommodate with accessibility as we get to those points. So I want to keep that discussion away from that overall macro look, because we're talking about a playground at this point in time and access to the playground, which is the most important thing. And a question through your, Mayor, to staff. So would we be able to, since there's been discussion about a wheelchair accessible play element, remove something from the existing plan, put in an item like this, and if there was cost overruns, we would then maybe have the flexibility to fund it from the Growing Communities Fund as opposed to waiting to the budget process, again slowing down the overall process.
Through to Councillor Garnett, that is an option. We may need to retender just because of the change in scope. Most playground manufacturers do include options that do have ramps. I do want to point out that any sort of climbing element is not, by nature, just not accessible to a child in a wheelchair. So I'm not quite sure where that fits in. But yeah, we could retender, and it will be more expensive, but we could bring that forward at that time if that was a desire.
Okay, thank you. And just one last point, just to tie into comments others made about parking. Very familiar with this park, and although there is more parking than other areas, it's very awkward parking. Even when we make the upgrades to it, it's extremely difficult to get in and out of that parking lot safely. So I honestly think, I know I wanted to distinguish between neighborhood parks, but from my living in that area for over 2 decades, the majority, almost 100% of the people that use that park were neighbors. So it's by any definition a neighborhood park. I don't think it would ever become a destination park just because of the awkwardness. And I have seen people that have come from other jurisdictions when you're having like a baseball practice saying, can we have it somewhere else? Just because they don't want to park there, because trying to get back onto Ocean is extremely challenging, if not unsafe. So that's another perspective to add in there. This is, I don't want to belabor the point, but it's just, I think that staff has done a really good job with this, and I think I understand where Councillor O'Keefe is coming from. I understand why she has these concerns. I just don't think that this particular park is the place to do it. I think there will be other opportunities in our community that we can revisit and have a totally accessible park in an area where more people are going to be able to access it, and it can become a center point of even the tourism. Because where this one is going to exist is not going to be a place where tourists are going to go. They're just not. It's just too far out of the way. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. And so we do have the motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Novak, Councillor O'Toole, myself, Councillor Gurnett, and Councillor Duck. The motion is defeated. Council, I would turn to a councillor who may wish to make this first part of the staff recommendation. I will take them as two parts, two recommendations. Actually, yeah, sorry, the two motions can be moved together. Councillor Novak.
I'll move that staff work with Habitat Systems, Inc. on a modified playground design that includes rubberized surfacing and falls within the available background budget of $130,000, and that staff report back to council regarding the final design for the review and consideration.
Second.
Having it moved and seconded, I'll turn to the mover and seconder. Councillor Novak.
I think I made clear in my earlier remarks how I felt about this. I'm not too sure about the budget figure of $130,000, since staff report says that rubberized surface would bring it up to $200,000, but that'll come back to the council with the final design and, I assume, budget for review and consideration. If we're not happy with it at that time, we can make the decision then, but I think this is the way to go, and it'll help to get another playground out that will really be functional for a large percentage of the population on the west side. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. Councillor O'Toole.
No, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thanks. I'm not in favor, no surprise, to the motion, without going into repeating a lot of things. But for this in particular, as I said, the park that's going to be created, it's going to have a rubberized surface, but it's not going to be accessible. It's not an accessible park. So that's a concern for me. And the comment made that, yeah, it will serve the needs of the majority of the people in the area. Yeah, that's true, it will. You know, because 75% of our population don't have disabilities. So for the 25% that identified that their needs are not being met in our accessibility plan, it won't apply to them. And so for those reasons, I won't won't support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I have a question I'm going to turn to staff, and that is in the SPAC committee recommendation, it made reference to a play structure to accommodate a wheelchair. I don't mean to put staff on the spot, and I'm not wanting to design a park, but do staff have an indication of what an element like that would look like? Are there many options for that? Is I guess what I'm asking.
Many of the playground manufacturers do have ramps associated with potential playground designs. And then one element that was brought up at the committee was it was called a We Go Around, and they actually have one at a school in Saanich, and it's kind of like a merry-go-round, or merry-go-round, and it has an internal turn wheel, so someone in a wheelchair can actually turn themselves, and it's fun. That element is fun for children of all abilities, I would say. That element was about $70,000 to purchase and install for that one piece of equipment. And then there's also elements like both Jubilee Park and the new Green Glade Park, and also Panorama, They all have a ramp that goes up to kind of a teeter-totter or bounce type element. That element is used in 3 parks in the very close vicinity. So again, if that was council's desire to get an element like that, it could be accommodated, but they're very common already in the area. So as far as other elements, we could, if we were to put it out to tender again, we could get other ideas from manufacturers and suppliers.
Thank you. The second question is on another aspect of the committee's recommendation: improved access to all areas, including the playground and future multi-sport court. Does staff have an appreciation of what improved access to all areas, including the playground, means?
Yes, the sketch that was provided to the Saanich Peninsula Advisory or Accessible Advisory Committee didn't show the actual path connections to the playground. The path stopped, and also for the picnic area. But we did hear that that was we would have done that for the playground anyway. We would have provided a ramp similar to what was at Rathdown. But if it is a rubberized surface, that would change that design. But we would provide a connection to that regardless. And the picnic area, if we were to hard surface it, it would also all be connected. So that would be during the second phase of the project, if we were to hard surface more of the park for that type of element.
So staff actually see accommodating that within that particular request from the committee within the current design for this park?
Yes.
Thank you. And my last question is an open accessible play space. Will there not be an open accessible play space in Breathitt Park?
Again, I think the intention of that particular one was to do an 100% accessible area. There was some discussion about Harper's Playground down in Portland, Oregon, which kind of has rolling hills, and it has some natural type elements for some more able-bodied children to jump around on. So I think that was the intention of that specific element, that specific item, even though it doesn't say 100% accessible.
My last question, I think, is with the current, the next step for staff now is to go for the final design. I'm not considering a redesign, but is it possible to add an element like a play structure to accommodate a wheelchair or an open accessible space with where staff are in the design of this park now versus having to totally redesign it and go through that longer process that we made reference to earlier in the meeting?
Yes, the play structure to accommodate a wheelchair, the We Go Round, is actually supplied by Habitat, so that would be something that could be accommodated in discussions with them. Unless we were to remove elements of the park, it is more expensive, obviously. And the open accessible play structure, that would really, I think the intention of SPAC was to have a full redesign. And in that case, we would require a consultant to come and do this design for us. The design you see of the playground now is, we put it out to tender, and all the playground designers came, our manufacturers and suppliers presented their designs to us. So we didn't actually hire a specific playground designer to do these. These were the bids submitted by the manufacturers and suppliers of them. So if we were to do the open accessible play space, again, I think that as SPAC envisions it, we would have to hire a third-party consultant and go through a design process, and we would want SPAC involved in that. And then we would go up to tender based on that design. So that would take, I think 2024 would be the design year if we were to do that, and 2025 would be the construction year.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Where I'm going with my questions is, as I'm wanting to avoid the redesign over the next 2 years. However, I do acknowledge, as I did earlier, the work that SPAC has put into making the recommendations. And what I was perhaps looking for an opportunity is there an additional accessible item in this list that SPAC has presented that could be added to the current intended design without having to go to a third-party consultant or redesign? I do appreciate that if there was an additional accessible element, that there would be an additional cost to that, and that I think council might be willing, to consider that. We will be considering it at some time in the future. We've already spoken to our intention to want to do that. So I guess where I was going with that was, to perhaps suggest an amendment to the motion that is on the floor, but I'm not sure how to do that. So I'll leave my idea for the moment, and I will turn to other speakers. I think I'm sorry, which councillor I had next on the speaking list? Okay, Councillor Duck, then Councillor Novick, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, I'll support the motion as presented. I think that staff have given direction on future parts of Breathitt Park that will be added to address many of these items on the list. I think they've also heard that SPAC will be coming back with a review of this Parks Master Plan and giving some input into that. So I think we're addressing those issues as we move down the road. I think the challenge here is that it was a timing thing. We're caught between the design being done and SPAC reviewing, and I just don't see the delay in time of a year to accommodate this when we're going to be picking up many of these elements coming down the road. So I would like to move forward with the motion as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck, Councillor Novick, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you to staff, I have one question before I comment, and that is much the way the mayor suggested that it might be possible to add elements to the current design. If we don't add elements to the current design, we go ahead with it as it's planned, how difficult would it be, and would there be an excess of cost to add these types of elements at a later date in the playground area with the rubberized surface and all?
Through to Councillor Novak, I do want to clarify that the 130,000, the motion, would be a smaller playground than the than the design concept provided. The design concept provided with just the wood chips would be 130,000, but we would need to shrink that to stay within the $130,000 with a rubberized surface. So I do want to clarify that, and we would want to make. If there's any provisions required for drainage, we would want to make sure we're thinking about that in advance of this playground, but we can add on to playgrounds in the future if that was a desire as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm in accord with Councillor Duck. I think we should move ahead with this, and I think modifications can be made in the future if we wish. I'm also open to an amendment as the mayor suggested. But either way, I think we should move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a question or comment through you to staff. In regards to the open accessible play space, my recollection from that discussion is that basically just wanting to have some area where, say, a kid in a wheelchair or some other mobility device could, go around boulders or go up a hill and down a hill or with some other kind of thing. So is that something that could be incorporated on a small scale without a total redesign, I'm wondering, like based on the other sort of landscaping and stuff that you had planned?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, as we're not playground experts or accessibility experts, staff could do our best, but it's way better to get a third party involved in a design in that process, because ultimately that's how we'll get someone who's just an expert in that field. There just happens to be a couple large boulders at Breathitt Park that staff are considering moving around. They wouldn't be within the rubberized surfaced area though, because the rubberized surface is expensive on its own, but staff already have that in the back of our minds. I guess just with this playground structure, there is space in there for a child in a wheelchair to move throughout it. That was part of what attracted me to this particular, especially the 5 to 12-year-old structure. I thought there was space in there, but again, there's different ways we can do it, but if we were to do it like really properly, the Harper's Playground way, getting a third-party consultant would just be much better to get a better product in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion, opposed? Councillor Keefe is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I will comment that while we've had a lot of discussion tonight, we haven't given any direction to staff with regards to future accessibility improvements in our parks. Can I turn to staff and perhaps confirm that based on the discussion you've heard from council this evening that accessibility elements will be considered in all future park improvements, in the balance of improvements? Without a motion from council?
Yes, we can do that. When we are negotiating with Habitat Systems, would you like us to consider alternate items specifically and bring those back at the time, even if they're, and allow council to make that decision when we bring it back, if it is over the 130,000, or is that something you wouldn't want us to pursue at this time?
I appreciate what the SPAC committee was recommending with regards to this particular park, but I think that a takeaway message from them is that there is a desire for more accessible elements in our parks, in this park and in other parks. And again, I don't think it's council's work to design those elements or say which elements in which park, but as you're working with consultants and the experience that those consultants have and that you're gaining on this, that you would bring forward in future budgets for future park improvements, a balance between general improvements and accessible improvements. Thank you. Councillor Keefe.
Motion arising.
Please, go ahead.
So I'd like to move that when staff report back to council regarding the final design, they bring forward information on options for a play structure to accommodate a wheelchair in Breathitt Park.
Second for discussion.
Councillor Keefe.
I think I've said enough. I mean, basically trying to, this is not the perfect playground, but looking for some ways that we can at least have a play structure that a child in a wheelchair mobility device could access. As I said before, if we're going to invest all of this money in a rubberized play surface, there should be, it's really wasted unless there's something for them to play on. So.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you. And so in my mind, this motion arising addresses the suggestion Ms. Clary made around looking to see if an additional apparatus can be included in this park, such as a we go around, something of that nature. As the mayor also noted, recognizing that there would be a revision to the budget would be required, but that conversation be had at this time and brought back to council. So I'm supportive of the motion arising, with the understanding that staff are supportive given the suggestion came from engineering.
Thank you. I just seek a clarification through staff because we did hit an element that certain of this improvements, and I'm not sure if it was this improvement, would actually require a third-party consultant, a redesign and change the timing of the planned Breathitt improvements.
That was for the open accessible play space. That would have been 100% accessible. Elements such as the We Go Round are really just a plug and play element you can purchase from a manufacturer and put it in a play area.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, which one did you recommend? It was in your recommendation, Councillor?
Yeah, no, that was sorry, that was the play structure.
Oh, my
as
apologies.
Mentioned by Ms. Clary, not the open play. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this motion arising? I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Council. Thank you, staff. We'll now turn to Section 13, staff reports, and under 13A, we have the ArtSea lease renewal and annual program update. I'll turn to staff for an introduction. Mr. Hissick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are two purposes of this report. One is to inform council that the lease for the building at Tallista is being renewed as per the terms of the existing agreement. And the second purpose is to provide updates from ArtSea on the operation of their various programs. ArtSea were unable to commit to a presentation to council this year, but they have forwarded their various annual reports for council consideration. They would be pleased to answer any questions that might arise tonight. So the report before you identifies certain consideration points on every one of their attachments. The sculpture walk, for instance, that's a separate memorandum of understanding which is expiring at the end of May 2024. And ArtSea will be holding discussions regarding a possible extension to that MOU early in the new year, and will confirm their decision at that time. They are, however, recommending that the one original sculpture remaining from the original program that they set up be purchased at this time, or at least in the 2024 budget. And one of the recommendations staff is making is that it be included in the 2024 budget with 2 years of amenity funding from the town in order to purchase that last piece. Finally, on the Arts Grants program, staff have reported that they are getting more and more money, but so far have not yet been able to allocate that in a timely manner. And we would be looking to keep an eye on that grants program over the next 2 years prior to confirming long-term funding at that level. Now, if council has any questions, I'd be pleased to try and address them.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions of the report. Councillor Renewal.
Thank you, Mayor. With respect to the last item, Mr. Hisik, that you referenced, which is summarized on page 2 of the report, your understanding in terms of how, I know they've acknowledged this challenge with respect to awarding these grants. Have staff currently had any discussion with respect to looking to ensure that process can be fairly expedited? Because it, as is noted, that funding typically had gone to the CRD Arts program as a contribution from Sydney to the CRD Arts program. It went here, it stayed here, but obviously the intent was it was going to be utilized and get out to artists. So if you could maybe comment a little further on that item and the feedback you've had from ArtSea with respect to this challenge.
Honesty, Councillor, I think the receipt of this information is fairly fresh. Staff are not in a position to work with them on the program, but what I would suggest is we challenge them to show over the next 2 years that they can distribute the amount of funding that's being provided by the town and North Saanich in a timely manner, and then maybe revisit the funding level in a couple of years if the current backlog of funding persists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Renewal. Councillor O'Keefe, and then myself.
Yeah, so just in response to that question, so having sat in on several of their meetings this past year, so one of the challenges with the grant program was that started when we were still in the throes of COVID. And so the issue is that there weren't many or any events taking place. Artists were very reluctant to come forward to apply for funding because there's often a lot of long-term planning. So if you're planning an arts event, say at the Mary Winspear or wherever, and you're not sure what the COVID regulations were going to be, people still unsure about feeling unsafe about coming out to events. And so as a result, there wasn't much uptake during that period. And even once things started lifting, people were still apprehensive about getting back out there and planning events. because they often have to put out some money in advance and concern about whether people are gonna come and support their event. So that's kind of been the major reason that they've had the buildup of that. Now that things are sort of back to normal, they're optimistic in the marketing that they're gonna do for the program, and they're starting to see more applications coming in. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I do have a concern on this. I do appreciate the update from staff and the comments from our representative to SPAC, but to have an unallocated balance standing at 43,000 with an additional 32,800 to be contributed by Town of Sydney North Saanich in 2024. To catch up, they would have to give out an inordinate amount of grants, and I think there could be an expectation in the future from organizations that receive it that they could be successful in the future. The CRD has continued, in each of the last couple of years to hand out several $1 million in grants to well in excess of 100 organizations, and so I do appreciate the challenges that ArtSea has faced, but I am concerned with continuing to allocate that amount until ArtSea has been able to allocate the existing 43,000. And so my question through to Mr. Hissick is, I would like to give first I would like to invite the Arts Council to present or to provide more information to Council on the intentions of their grant program in 2024, and for Council to be able to consider the allocation of our portion of 32,800 in 2024. If Mr. Hissick, you could speak to what would be a reasonable process for Council given the agreement we have with the Arts Council.
Well, certainly any questions that arise tonight will be forwarded to ArtSea to be addressed, and I believe the executive director is watching this meeting, so she might be taking note. But certainly if they could provide some response before we go into budget deliberations, that might inform our decision as to what we might do with the funding for next year. And specifically with this program, when I met with them earlier this year, it was with the intention of meeting Council's expectation for some sort of funding agreement with respect to all of our major allocations throughout the year. And that is something I'll be working on continuously with them until we've arrived at something that both parties can live with.
Okay. I mean, during the pandemic, we did see, I think, one organization actually not take the grant that we awarded them, either through grants and aid. I believe it was in the grants and aid program, because they were unable to allocate those funds. So possibly a consideration for ArtSea would be to decline an element of our grant, given that they have more than a year's worth of grant funds currently unallocated. But I will leave the discussion there. We do have the motion on the floor. Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Mayor.
Point of
Sorry,
order,
we don't have a
don't.
motion on the
No,
floor. These are questions from the staff report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And to your point, or to staff, wanting to monitor, and I completely understand that. But I did look at the numbers, and there's over $36,000 that have been given out, and another 4,200 that was withdrawn. So over 40,000, and another 23,000, I believe, that were asked to resubmit. So I guess, having said that, and the intake is to come, I believe Councillor O'Keefe can speak to the intake is to come, so that those resources won't be at that level once the intake is done. And yeah, I note that 2023 there was a lot more applications, but I just look at it from the perspective that there's $36,000 to $40,000 that went to arts groups in our community that, all likely would not have gone to them had they gone, because they can't work through the CRD from what we've been told. So I understand the concern about the excess amount of money and why we should monitor it. I think it also does speak to the fact that it is somewhat successful, and given the uptake in the last year, I mean, I think it's wise to monitor it for the next couple. But I think if there's a consistency from what we've seen lately, I don't think this balance will persist. And my hope is it won't persist and there'll be more uptake, but I am happy to see that this much money has come into our community that otherwise probably would not have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. So, we do have a recommendation. Councillor Keefe?
Sure. I'll make the recommendation that the purchase of the sculpture, the Muse, be authorized for 2024 with $14,000 in funding from the town's amenity reserve.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're turning to item 13B, which is the award of janitorial services. The contract for 2023 to contract 2023-023. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Mr. Demare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report brings forward the summary of results from a recent tender for janitorial services for town facilities. The current contract expires the end of this year. So a new tender was issued and it closed early November for a 2-year period of 2024-2025. 8 bids were received as part of that tender. Of the 8 bids, they were all reviewed and evaluated based on the tender criteria. Through the evaluation, the bid submitted by Sky Blue Services Corp was determined to have the best overall value, and there is a recommendation for award in the report as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Demare. Are there any questions of staff on the report? Seeing none, we have a recommendation. Councillor Renewal.
I'll move the recommendation that contract number 2023-023, janitorial services for municipal facilities covering 2 years, 2024 and 2025, be awarded to Sky Blue Services Corp.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We have no items under Section 14 correspondence. We have one item under Section 15 correspondence for information. We are receiving that this evening by virtue of being on our agenda. So I will turn to Section 16, which is notices of motion, and I do have a motion to read in for the record this evening, and we will deliberate it at our next council meeting. And I so move that staff bring forward a proposed amendment to the Council Procedures Bylaw to A, eliminate committee of the whole meetings, and B, to amend the regular council meeting schedule from 2 times a month to 3 times a month. So
Second.
There's no seconding. It's Councillor, thank you. It's just read into the record to come onto the agenda at the next council meeting. Thank you. And so we will turn to 17, and we're always grateful to Councillor Gurnett to read our motion to go in camera.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters respecting personal information about identifiable individuals being considered for an appointment pursuant to Section 90.1A of the Community Charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor? We are